Tell me what happened to you when you left this realm.
Yeah, so I embraced my mediumship abilities. It was around the age of 20 is when I was like, okay, we're gonna figure this out. But up until then, like I can go back to the age of 5, feeling people in my room. I knew there were invisible people in my room, but I didn't have like a family line of mediums or that grandmother, that wise grandmother who would sage the house or something. I didn't have that. And so I didn't have this reference point. I had no reference point for what was happening. And I couldn't explain why. I just knew, but I would go to bed at night and know there was people standing around me, and I'd have the covers over my head. And so much of my early years with this gift was actually very scary because I didn't understand it, right? And then, as I got older, I communicated with my grandmother after she passed, but in my mind I was like, that was just a dream. Tried to logic it all away, and then I started hearing spirit, and the ways that you hear spirit isn't always audibly, right? It's not always like an external voice. Sometimes it's a voice in your mind, sometimes it's your own voice in your mind but not your thought. And so to try and discern all that when again you don't have a reference point led me into a ton of anxiety when I was 17. And so I say that because underneath all of that, or on top of all of that, I was like a normal kid doing sports and school and plays and everything, but I had this bubbling, scary aspect to my life that I wanted to understand but didn't know where to go to understand it. And so it was around the age of 20-ish, mid-20, early 20s, that finally one of my guides actually was standing down the end of the hallway, and I was in the house by myself. I was folding laundry, and there's always this kind of like prickly or bubbly sensation when they come near, and now I really love that feeling, but when I was younger it would give me the EBGBs. And that feeling came on. Then I heard this voice at the end of the hall, this big, like firm masculine voice saying, "Ginette, look down the hall." And I mean, you can imagine I kind of yelled every profanity I could think of out of terror. And he was like, "Ginette, look down the hall." And so I remember turning my head so slowly to see who was there. And it was actually what I've come to know now is my lifetime guide standing there. And it was essentially like, now's your time to actually get into this, okay? And the thing that changed it for me was that my cat at the time was sitting there staring up at him, looking at him with her tail kind of wagging, when it like wags back and forth. And I knew in that moment that she saw him and I saw him. And it was this piece that validated me being ready to dive into actually learning this instead of running from it. So that was a big change maker for me. So like you said, like I always kind of knew there was stuff, but I kind of avoided it, tried to be so normal, if I could put it that way. And then after that experience, I was just like, okay, we're going to dive in and see what this means. And it led me to embracing my gift as a medium. And it was all through just kind of word of mouth that spread. And I was busy doing mediumship readings for about a decade. I did talk to my family very bluntly. I was like, listen, guys, I am seeing deceased people and spirits. I talked to them and I realized I always have been feeling them. So I'm exploring this. And so it was kind of like, no one was like, don't do this or anything like that. But it was kind of like, all right, Ginette, sure. Kind of like, we'll see. Because again, like I didn't grow up in a line of mediums where it was like, oh, welcome to the club or something like that. It was kind of like an unknown, so it was like yet to be seen, I guess. And the more that they saw, I would say something and then it would happen, or I would validate something that I couldn't have known that maybe occurred before I was born, things like that. Once enough of those things happened, then it was more accepted. But like you said, that closeted medium, I was willing to share it with kind of certain people, and it kind of just grew by word of mouth. For the first 10 years of doing my mediumship work, it was all just word of mouth. I didn't really advertise. I didn't have my website. It just kind of spread that way. And I was happy with that. I was like, yeah, this is good. And, I'm doing my thing. But it was after my NDE that my guides were like, so if you're going back, you got to actually step up and like really share this. And I was like, yeah, I get it now, for sure, I'm in. So it was just kind of this neat evolution, but it did take time. But the driving force behind it for me was that I have always had this strong undercurrent, if I could call it, or like purpose within, that when it's pushing me in a direction, I have to go in that direction. Because if I try to go against it, it's just it's a non-starter. I just can't go against it. And so that's, I think, what just kept pushing me through to stand in my truth and keep going. So what I've come to understand is there have been many lifetimes leading to this one to, first of all, give me the resilience to keep going, to give me the framework of past life understandings that when ignited would just come back in memory or knowing. It's kind of like, you know, when you say you try a new sport and you realize you're really amazing, right? You're like, wow, look how good I am at golfing. And this is my second time golfing, right? It's like, oh, you probably did that in a past life or something like that, right? So what I heard from my guides was that there was much preparation for this lifetime. And essentially, being here now, and everyone that does have these open gifts or open awareness to their purpose right now is so specific to the massive change that we're going through in the world. Like, we're in massive rapid ascension, right? My guide said from the year 2020 to 2024, it's about 100 years worth of intellectual and spiritual awakening condensed into 4 years, right? So there are many souls here at this time opening and finding this like thing that's pushing them to do more, to help, to ascend, to awaken, just like you are doing your thing, right? Like, you're living your purpose. So I feel it's very timely in conjunction to everybody else that's here at this time. I was very comfortable, again, at this point doing mediumship. So mediumship to me, again, everyone's different, but to me, I'm like a translator or an interpreter, right? So I hear spirit, I interpret it, and I share it with the person. So I'm like that middle person, right? So there's more consciousness that's going on of me being a part of the conversation. Whereas channeling is where, like you said, I move more out of the way. So I'm like, say, 3/4 pushed out in a way, not pushed out, I step out kind of, but I'm still connected, but I'm hearing it come through me and into my voice audibly at the same time as somebody else. I'm not hearing it before and translating it. It's coming direct through me. And so the first time this really happened, I was doing a mediumship reading, and the spirit that was coming through me or connecting with me, she was telling me these things and I was telling the person, but I kept not quite getting it the way she wanted it. And so it was so interesting. She said, Ginette, do you mind if I just come direct through you? And I was like, okay, like, what do you mean? She's like, can you just like move over a little bit and I'll just come direct through you? And so I remember saying to my client, I'm like, I'm just going to channel this because she wants to speak directly. And it was essentially that. That's where I learned you just move to the side and then they come direct through you. And I had more of her like inflections, her cadence of speech, apparently her tone. Not that my voice fully changed, but you could see or you could hear apparently the similarities, and it just came directly through. And so it's like I was hearing it for the first time at the same time as my client was. And so it's this free flow thing. And I would say it varies how much I remember in detail of what is said in channeling. The higher the frequency of the being, the less that I remember in the moment, and the more that I'll need to go back and listen to get the full memory of it. But if it's like a family member or friend that wishes to channel through, then I'm usually more able to kind of keep up with what's coming through. What's interesting is what led me to that was I used to have a lot of troubles with my menstrual cycle. Essentially, I would hemorrhage every month. And so it was so severe that, you know, we couldn't fix it. We finally had to do surgery. Essentially, that's to really make it a small, short story. So we get to the point of surgery, and there was something really interesting. And I mean, I wrote a book about it. So there's the whole story in there of how it led me to that moment. But what happened was, you know, going into the operating room, I had this amazing sense of excitement. And I've had surgery before, and I'm not usually like excited and wanting to high five people, but like, I swear I could hear music in the background, or maybe I just felt music, but like excitement. And I remember when the anesthesiologist came to put me under, I felt like a kid who was waiting for the lifeguard to say I could have my turn on the water slide, right? Like, you know, when you're waiting there and you're like, come on, let me go, let me go. And it was so interesting because as soon as I was put under, my grandmother, who was in spirit, came and met me. And what was interesting is that when I started walking up this kind of like grassy hill where I could see the blades of grass in finite detail if I wanted to or not, and the sky was like this most beautiful, amazing summer blue, I knew where I was. Like, I knew exactly where I was. I knew I was on the other side, and I knew this was vastly different from any other astral travel I had done or spirit communication. I mean, I've spent thousands of hours in readings talking to spirits about their transition, how they died, all of this. but none of that was the same as this, as being there. It's like feet on the ground, right? And so I walked up this hill with my grandmother, and we came upon this like summer barbecue like atmosphere, picnic kind of thing, and I could see the red and white checkered tablecloths. And what I realized was there was all of these spirits from my life that had crossed over, but lifetimes before. And I knew them all, and they were just walking up, and I was giving them the best hugs that you can imagine. It's like when a toddler, I always say, when a toddler throws themselves in your arms, you know they're giving you all of their love. And I got to spend the time reminiscing and talking to people from lifetimes before, being like, what have you been up to? What's been going on? And so it felt like I spent hours there, hours. And then after that, my grandmother took me to this separate place, kind of at the, what I call like the edge of the galaxy, or where the edge of the universe, where the universe is essentially creating itself. We were in this white room with this massive white boardroom table, and I had my council around me, my guides. We all have a group of guides or a council, and they rolled out on the table these blueprints. And I was like, what? I'd always explained to people that our life was like a tapestry, right? And we like weave the weavings of fate and all this as a tapestry, but they rolled it out and showed it to me as blueprints. And I remembered looking at it thinking like, this looks like architect blueprints. Like, how cool is that, right? And so when they rolled it out, I saw this massive line down the center, and it still had this energy moving back and forth, this kind of iridescent energy that, you know, was like life force. So my guides and I, we went through my life review up until that point, like where we were, and we went through everything. And then there was a certain piece that was remaining. Now, the piece that was remaining was about 6 inches long in my memory, but I can't remember how long that is compared to what we reviewed before. Like one of my guide's shoulders is right in the way, so I don't know how long it is, because of course I would measure to see, right? And so once we hit that juncture of where we were right then, that's when they asked me if I wanted to stay or come back. And that's when I really realized the juncture point that I was at. I was like, wow, well, yeah, I want to go back. And so they said, you know, if you go back, then you have the opportunity now with what's remaining of your life to change out different juncture points. And I was like, oh. And so they said, you will remember the first one, but you won't remember the others until they happen. And the first one, I remember it was like a fuse in a fuse box kind of thing. Like I was pulling out this fuse, and I remember it was one of chronic illness, because I had always had something wrong, right? Growing up, I would get sick easy, all this kind of stuff. And so I remember pulling it out and being like, are you sure I can do this? And they're like, yeah. And I put it down, and I picked one of health, and I like put it back in. And I remember kind of thinking like, we'll see, you guys, we'll see, right? Because I was so used to just being the one who was always sick. And so I changed a bunch of them, which really taught me the idea of how much we do design our life blueprint. That's our destiny piece. And so after I did that, they asked me again, do you want to stay? Like, are you sure you want to go, or do you want to stay here? And that's when I had the opportunity to see my higher self, essentially separate from me, yet still the same as me. And I know that doesn't make sense really in our human terms, but on the other side, so many other things make sense. And when I got to see the value and the awe and wonder that my higher self had for the human experience, how much what we are all doing right now, and the triumphs and the pitfalls and the struggles and the successes and everything in between, how valuable that is to the soul, I was like, wow, yeah, I absolutely have to go back. And so that's when I had an understanding that my body had been weakened up to that point, that if I decided to stay, it was basically like a light switch, and it would have just been a switch, essentially, that would have had me code on the table in the operating room and just have a massive heart attack and not be revived. And so I was like, no, I'm going to go back. And so it was interesting, because at that point then, this next piece happened within a span of like 3-4 seconds. But I heard the nurse in the recovery room say, Ginette, are you awake? And then I felt my spirit go like whoosh back into my body, but I could still feel my grandmother with me. But then my higher self came in so clear, and I'm not clear after surgery. I'm quite the comic, actually. My higher self came in and said to the nurse, with my eyes still closed, I was like, I need you to write something down. And the nurse stopped what she was doing, and she's like, okay, honey, what is it? And I was like, I need you to write down these 4 phrases. I'm a medium, and they're very important. Then I need you to fold up the paper and put it in my hand. Like, I gave her clear instructions, and so she did. And so I wrote it down. I have it on my desk here. So this is the paper from surgery. And these words wouldn't really make sense to people. It's great Baba, tree roots, time to entwine, and I went far. So it doesn't really make sense to people. Baba was my grandmother. But what happened was my higher self caught the nurse before I had any pain meds put into my body, because my higher self knew that if I had pain meds, I would question all of it, right? Like there's still a linear sense to me, right? So I had that paper, I gave it to my mom. And after I was in recovery, I was like, don't lose this paper. And then it was a couple days later when I had no more pain meds in my body, Spirit was like, it's time for you to read the paper. And so I remember I unfolded it. I read those 4 statements and it just, everything flooded back to me. I already knew something significant happened. I had pieces of the memory, but these words triggered the whole experience. And I remember I sat that afternoon talking to my parents. I was like, guys, I have to tell you a story. And they were like, wow. And then I wrote my book. Like, it just all poured out. And so that was my NDE in the best nutshell I could give you.